It's a pleasure to have Hervé Doll with us. I have a list because Hervé's CV and Hervé's list of activities is very long. It goes back to his PhD that he did at IAS in Orsay, under the supervision of Jean-Loup Puget, who is in the audience. So it's very nice to also have Jean-Loup and Hervé united here. And then Hervé went to Steward Observatory in Tucson, where he was a research associate. He got his tenure track assistant professor in Université Paris-Sud in 2003. And he became a member of IUF in 2010.
Yes.
And then he became a professor at Université Paris-Sud in 2014. 4 years ago, and he's now vice-president of the University Paris-Sud, and he's in charge of the outreach, education, and art and culture at Université Paris-Sud. Hervé is interested in the formation of large-scale structure in general and protoclusters, as he will talk to us about, and is also very interested in the role of infrared galaxies in galaxy evolution in general, and is involved in the Euclid mission also. So please, Hervé, thank you very much for being here.
Merci Pierre for this long and nice introduction. You forgot that I'm also associate to IAP, associate, or I don't know what's the word, but research associate to IAP, which I'm very proud of, because I have some connections with this famous lab here. So I'm going to talk about protoclusters of galaxies at high redshift. High redshift means here redshift around 2. Don't be excited at redshift 6 or 7. I won't talk much about this era. And more specifically about what we do with the Planck data, searching for this kind of highly infrared, bright infrared sources that forms a lot of stars at this kind of redshift. And I will spend a few words at the end towards Euclid and JWST, since these are the main missions that are coming into the landscape. And in between, I'll tell you what we did. Also, a note for the youngest part of the audience. We discussed pre-seminar about how you do a PhD and you do your career and stuff. And I was mentioning that the link with your PhD advisor is for life, and I'm happy to see that it's still a reality because Jean-Loup is there, and we are still collaborating and following. So it's a nice example. At least I think it's a nice example. So I'm going to talk about an introduction about what are clusters and protoclusters, and an update and a review of what has been done in the last few years. It will be a long part of my talk. So don't be surprised if it's long. Then I will focus on what we did with Planck to select high redshift and high star forming cluster candidates. And what we did beyond Planck, because Planck is a great mission to detect many things on the sky, but it's more difficult to see the details of the structures. So we used other facilities, Herschel and Spitzer mainly, but others. And then I will review what we did with all these facilities from the imaging point of view and spectroscopic point of view. Some words are missing for any reason, but that's not a big deal. And then I will finish with Euclid and JWST and with some conclusions and also some personal conclusion. So if you point a telescope in the sky, like the Hubble Space Telescope, you see a wealth of galaxies, various forms, various colors, various redshift. These red guys are probably very high redshift, although I'm not expert on this field. You see some structure, but if you point the same telescope around the galaxy clusters in a nearby universe, you see galaxy clusters here, a huge density, over-density of matter, visible matter, bionic matter, hot gas, but also dark matter, as we know now. And so these big structures, galaxy clusters at low redshift, are amazing tools to study the faraway universe through lensing, but also the physics of evolving galaxies and the formation of these structures. This nice image is done mainly in the optical and near infrared. It's from the Hubble Frontier Fields. But you can also observe these clusters at other wavelengths, like in purple here in the X-rays, where the hot gas has a nice and detectable emission. but also on the right through the SZ effect, so Sonia-Zeldovich effect, where the photons from the cosmic microwave background, the CMB in the background, gain energy with inverse Compton effect with the hot gas of the cluster, and produce either a hole or a bright spot, depending on the frequency you are, that allows you to detect the hot gas of clusters, regardless of the redshift. It only depends on the mass. So you have also other means beyond optical to detect galaxy clusters, so X-rays, millimeter basically. And it works, so here's a Planck detection of a cluster. Here's an SPT detection from the ground. And people from SPT, because I won't talk much about SPT, so I'm doing it now, when they follow up these kind of clusters, these are real clusters, so they have an optical follow-up where you see many overdensities, various redshift. They go up to redshift 1 and slightly beyond. So it's a very efficient way, a complementary way to detect the clusters. So why clusters and other structures are interesting to study in the universe? This is the famous popularization view of how the universe evolves since the beginning with the inflation scenario, which is favored by, at least compatible with the latest Planck data. You have the recombination at redshift around 1100. So the universe becomes cooler and now optically thin because the light can go through. You have dark edges where basically nothing happened, just matter. Matter is matter and light, but no new source. And then you have the first objects and reionization due to this first object. So redshift greater than 7, maybe 10, depending, maybe 20, depends on which source you are talking about. And then you have what you call structure formation, which is the period that I would be more interested in. You have galaxies, galaxy clusters, cosmic web, dominated by dark matter, and we are here. The nice thing about galaxy clusters is that they originate from the largest fluctuations early on. So clusters can allow you to study cosmology on one side, but also physics of galaxies on the other side, because these are highly dense environments. When I was doing my PhD a long time ago, almost 20 years ago, studying galaxies, I was studying galaxies at that time, not clusters. Galaxies, we thought that galaxies could help put cosmological constraints, because cosmology at that time was not well settled. Fortunately, in a few years, and especially with WMAP and Planck now, we have a complete identity card of the universe through the cosmological observations. So we have the main cosmological parameters, the Hubble constant, the age, the baryon and dark matter density, etc. So now studying structure formation here can be used on its own for some parts. Of course, it's still used for cosmology because BAOs, dark matter, dark energy are still pregnant questions in contemporary astrophysics. But at least for some of the structures, clusters or galaxies, we don't need to invent cosmological parameters. We have them. They are fairly accurate, sub% for some of them. So these are the cosmological parameters taken from the latest Planck results from this summer. So in some sense, these structures are easier to study now because we don't need to reinvent H0 or omega matter or things like that. Despite that, clusters can be used for cosmology, even it's quite complicated. Here's an old plot from 3 years ago from Planck, where it was plotted the sigma 8, so basically the variance of matter at some scale of total matter, and the matter density here. And there was a discrepancy, well, a tension, as it was said, between CMB derived and cluster derived parameters. As far as I understand, because I did not take part too much on this kind of works, as far as I understand, these tensions are now mainly gone because, so this is the recent paper, Salvati and Planck 2018, same plot, sigma 8 versus omega matter, where the CMB is in blue, or various flavors, and cluster physics here is in yellow and green. So the tension tends to disappear for various reasons. One of them is the optical thickness, tau measured by Planck. So clusters are interesting on their own. I'm going to skip that. So what is the current status of studying clusters in the universe, especially towards higher redshift? So I'm taking this plot from Overzier 2016, which is a very nice paper, nice overview. And he plotted the current state of literature back 2 years ago, clusters and protoclusters versus redshift. In this redshift 1 zone, you have all the Planck, SPT, XMM, Chandra clusters that are observed since many years, and that gives very useful information about scaling relations, physics of the intracluster medium, etc. Some object tends to go to redshift larger than 1, especially the SPT guys, if I'm correct. Then you go to the realm of high redshift clusters, and you see there are two kinds of symbols. The red he quoted by high redshift clusters, right here. So clusters, there is a debate about the term protocluster. So if it's fuzzy and not clear to you, it's normal, it's the same for the community. But it tends to be a definition of cluster and protocluster. A protocluster is something that will turn at the end to a cluster. So it's not a subpart of the center part that will become a cluster. It's the whole thing that will eventually go into a cluster. And a cluster is something that is more or less relaxed with hot gas inside. Of course, all the clusters that are observed, especially with Planck, tend to see that they are not completely relaxed. That's the least we can say. But at least there is already hot gas inside. So that's the red points, complementary to these guys. And the blue guys here are things that are collapsing, accreting matter, and that will turn eventually into clusters. But that's the point of my talk. You will see that there is a various typology, various effects, various selection effects, and at least to me, the situation is not clear about these guys. So why is cluster important? Here are known simulations, like Millennium simulations, showing dark matter. So it's the redshift 6, 2, 1, and 0, and these are various zooms, large scale to smaller scales. And you see the galaxy clusters are the nodes of the cosmic web, so here's a zoom at redshift 0, so pure dark matter here. At redshift 1 and 2, you see that what will become eventually a cluster is still dispersed on a large scale. So nothing new, but it's better to have a clear view here. Another simulation which I like, taken from Muldrew et al. 2015, shows what a protocluster is. So this is again redshift 2, redshift 1, redshift 0, but you have 3 cuts in masses here. And all the black points are galaxies that will eventually come into a cluster. So basically on the left side you have a protocluster, and here you have a cluster at low redshift. The nice thing about this plot is that it shows you that at redshift 2, the angular size or the physical size is rather huge. If you convert it into observations, it's like 40 arc minutes, so almost a degree, or like 40 megaparsecs co-moving. So we know that, but it's a huge size. So if you want to observe a high redshift clusters, and you happen to observe something in the core because for any reason it's the brightest, that's cool. But don't forget that there is a lot of other things that will eventually come here. So if you want to study the protocluster, that's the difficulty. You would need, or you need, to observe the whole area. So that's one of the challenges if you want to understand the formation of these guys. More specifically, what do we want to observe is also this plot, inspired by Deckel and Birnbaum and plotted in Overzier. You have the redshift of the structures and the halo mass. So the usual, growth of structure depending on the mass and redshift. He overplotted the clusters that we know so far. So lower redshift cluster, X-ray, SZ, big clusters, and protoclusters. And the simulations and theoretical predictions basically try to understand how the gas, the baryonic gas, fall into the clusters and or galaxies to form stars and to increase the stellar mass. So the game is, how do you take cold gas and gas, how you cool it and put it into stars. And so you have different regimes according to the simulations. If you have at low mass, below this 10 to the 12, basically the gas is cold and you can cool it. You can form stars nicely, but it's small structures. The potential well is not big, so it's not that hot. But above 10 to the 12-ish, the gas in this structure, the bionic gas, is already very hot. And so apparently you cannot form stars here. But here you could form stars because you have cold streams, cold flows that can feed galaxies and still form stars. So this is predictions, and we'd like to have a clear and accurate understanding on what is the fate of the gas in this structure. Is there actually cooling flows that allows you to form stars and increase the stellar mass within the halo, because here's the halo? Or is it completely wrong? Is there this separation where there is no cooling flow or cold available gas at this redshift? It's still in question. So you see that this region, redshift around 2, is rather strategic if we want to study this transition, if it does exist, of the accretion and feeding of galaxies. Of course, we'd like to go much higher redshift, but redshift 2 is nice because it's still manageable in terms of observation. You don't need zillions of hours of every telescope to do that. That was for cluster. For regular galaxies, we know since many years how the star formation rate evolves in the universe. So this is redshift, and this is the star formation rate. And there is a peak around 2 where the universe was at its cosmic noon, as we say. So the universe was forming, most of the stars was most efficient to form stars in an average volume. I'm not talking about specific mass of galaxies because it changes with redshift. So most of the stars were formed in general in the universe at around 2. And now, of course, it's much less. And from that, we can also compute, and from observation, the stellar mass build-up, so high redshift, low redshift, and how the mass, the mass density, the stellar mass density, basically, you convert the gas into stellar masses, and with time, you have more stars. So the galaxies gain mass in stars. And to give an idea, redshift 1 and 2, you get roughly half of the stellar mass already built up. So half of the stellar mass is built up at redshift after, and the rest below. Protoclusters are thought to be very actively star-forming. So this is a plot from Cato, where they plot the star formation rate density, so per volume, with redshift. This is the density I just showed in the previous plot, so here. And they show from various samples that in clusters or protoclusters, you have orders of magnitude higher star-forming density than in the field. So this structure, clusters and protocluster, there's something happening. So that's what we want to look at. And this is corroborated by predictions. Predictions from Xiang et al., who show that you got the redshift here, and you got the star formation rate density. Maybe you can just look at the upper plot. You have the total star formation rate density, like the Madao and Dickinson review I showed you 2 slides ago. And they computed that in protocluster, this is how the rate evolves. So at redshift above 2, most of the stars, well, not most, but a significant, because it's log scale, so it's not most, but a significant fraction of the stars, star formation is done in protocluster in general, and in the cores in particular. So you see the interest of looking at protoclusters in their entirety, because otherwise you miss, if you look just at the core, you miss all the story and all the question you try to ask, what is the fate of the gas? So that's the challenge. Observe protoclusters at fairly high redshift. I guess I put again this zone, but not only the cores, the whole size of the clusters. A few nice detections were done in the recent past, especially by the French community. I mean, we can say it. We can be proud of what we did. Of course, it's large collaboration, but the French community is well represented. You have this famous cluster, Wang et al., at redshift 2.5, who was detected by overdensity in the Cosmos field, but it has the particularity of being a bright Herschel source, so it has a strong star formation rate. I'll come to that. It's work mainly done at CEA Saclay. You have work done here across the street at Observatoire de Paris by Simona Mei and Noiro. So they have many clusters around radio galaxies up to redshift 2.8. You have another team doing submillimeter detection. This is an ALMA background near-infrared image, but ALMA detection of a cluster recently, I guess it's from last month, published at Redshift 4. So it's an ultra-bright submillimeter source, really, really exceptional. Work done here in part is this famous spiderweb cluster at Redshift 2-ish, where they detected a gas and disk of cold gas. So it's really a nice example of how the gas may be evolving. So IAP is part of that, I think, and other clusters. And these are some major examples, but there are many others since a few years. This is a very, very active field, but it's kind of difficult to follow, but also to draw some general conclusions out of these very exciting works. Because almost each team has its own, selection effect. Like WONG is kind of complicated because they selected as overdensity of galaxies in the cosmos field, but then realized it was a huge, bright Herschel source. So it has basically two selections. My understanding, but you can challenge that if you wish, is that we have three kinds of families of high redshift clusters from the observational point of view. The first is clusters detected by basically overdensities, which are dominated by stellar masses. So when you see galaxies, and you have a lot, well, it's an overdensity, and you detect them. Usually it's done in the optical near-infrared, not only, but it's the main selection effect. And usually these guys show, red sequences, or not all the time, but most of the time. So usually these clusters are fairly mature, that means lower redshift, where the gas was kind of consumed, and you have already very massive galaxies. Not all the time, but most of the time. Then in yellow, you have the hot gas selection through X-ray and SZ mainly, so you are sensitive to not few percent of the mass due to galaxies in the clusters, but more like 15-20% of the mass, which is the hot gas, pionic gas. Another nice way to select, which is different from the other. And another one, which is biased towards star formation rate, which is expected because at some point this cluster should form a lot of stars at high redshift. Presumably they are young, not all the time, but most of the time, and you have various ways to detect them. AGN, radio, submillimeter, and also in the near and far infrared. And I'll be heavily biased towards the far infrared and submillimeter selection of these guys. So that was the end of the introduction. That's the introduction, and I hope to have given you a landscape of at least my understanding of protoclusters. And now I'm switching to what we did in this context with Planck mainly. So as you know, Planck is a fantastic mission, a lot of successes. And the last success is the legacy results and data that were released recently. So this is the 9 frequencies sky observed by Planck with LFI and HFI that you are well aware here at IAP. And the reasoning was the following. We have the spectrum of all the light in the universe. That's the plot I particularly like. It's the extragalactic background light from more than 20 orders of magnitude across the electromagnetic spectrum. So wavelength here, frequency there. I didn't go into much to the high energy, but you already have a lot of information there. So apart from the CMB that arises very early in the universe, all the rest of the plots tell you how structure formation basically releases light in the universe. It's called the extragalactic background light. And you got the relative intensity. So it's in nanowatt per square meter and per steradians. And you see that on this plot, the major contributor to the whole extragalactic background light is in the infrared. It's called cosmic infrared background. Back in the days, in 2006, with the whole team, we were able to measure precisely after the pioneers in 96, Puget, etc., to measure precisely the level here, and we showed for the first time that the CIB was greater than the other. It's not a matter of being greater than the other or not. It's a matter of what causes the fact that there is more light in the infrared than in the visible, for instance. understanding that it's dust reprocessed light. So you have stars that are formed in the galaxies, but you have dust around, and the dust absorbs this UV light, put in thermal equilibrium, and re-radiates in the infrared. So we show that embedded star formation is dominant in the universe. So the idea, if you want to study protoclusters, we say, well, maybe we should look in the data where we have the peak of the infrared background and look if there are structures there. And part of the motivation was done also by other Planck works, where they stacked. You know, Planck allows you to give you the lensing map, so basically a dark matter map, projected dark matter. And what they did, they stacked on the bright spot of the CIB the lensing map. And when you correlate them, you see that when you have a bright spot in the cosmic infrared background, you have a huge potential well. It's a long story short. And when you have nothing in the infrared background, you have no potential well. That's a summary of a long study and stuff. I can refer you to these papers. So cosmic infrared background, I mean star formation in general, is well correlated with mass. It's not a surprise. It's not a scoop, but it is proven in the Planck data. So what we did, we looked for infrared sources in the Planck data, and I will show you how we did. That's my professor part. Because sometimes people say, well, but this is SZ what you did. No, this is not SZ the way we selected here. If I'm showing wavelength and whatever intensity that you observe a galaxy, and if I'm doing it very quickly, you have the stellar peak, you have some pH, and you have the dust peak. So in the rest frame here, well, it's not as big as that, but here you have 100 micron, and here you are at 1 micron. And this is log-log scale. So this is the spectrum of a galaxy, so this is visible, and this is stars, and this is far infrared, and this is dust reprocessed emission. This is a low redshift. It has been known since many years with IRAS, ISO. We had the idea that if these guys are redshifted, so you redshift the galaxy, this 100 micron peak will turn into, for example, at redshift 2, you have the 1 plus z factor, so you multiply by 3. This 100 micron peak will be shifted at 300 micron. So what we did, we selected in the Planck data the bright spots that peak at 300 micron and above. So it's not SZ detection, it's just galaxy detection. But as you know, the Planck beam is rather large for galaxy studies. It's 4.5-ish arc minutes. So we won't be able to see one galaxy, one infrared galaxy. It's called infrared galaxies. Forget to mention that not all galaxies have this spectrum. It's not infrared galaxies because they are bright in the infrared. So if you have just one bright infrared galaxy, Planck is unlikely to detect it. But if you have many of those at the same location, that means if you are redshift 2 or above, you have many guys that form stars, they might be a protoclusters. And so we search for this concentration in the cosmic infrared background, which could be this guy. So that was done, especially with the Toulouse team. And we selected 2,000 spots in the sky, or 30% of the sky. We didn't do that in the galactic plane, obviously. 2,000 galaxy cluster high redshift candidates. And I guess that's the next slide. 2,000, I don't know where to, yeah, 2,000 guys. From that, we are very happy to see that they did exist. We did a Herschel survey of around 200 of those, 200, voilà, the 128 of those, to really see with a better angular resolution if they really look like cluster. So you have an image of the Planck HFI 545 gigahertz and the Herschel corresponding map. You see you have a gain in resolution by a factor of 10. It's normal. You have a survey on one side and an observatory on the other side. So it really helped us to see what we have, and we have a 98 success rate. Can give you more detail if you wish. And then we went to the near infrared here to be sensitive to the stars. So with Planck and Herschel, you are sensitive to dust. Here you are sensitive to stellar light. And we went to Spitzer in the near infrared, and we gain again a factor of 15. So this is 2 Herschel sources, so this is a zoom of this guy. You have 2 Herschel sources, and you detect finally all the galaxies that contribute to the Herschel beam. So it's I can't tell you the number of hours and years and stuff to get to this result, but those observers know what I'm talking about. But we were fairly happy because out of 2,000 we succeed to have 10% there and like a third there. So we think we have a representative sample, even if it's difficult to follow exactly all the statistics of the sample. So I'm showing you an example of what these complementary observations brought us after the first detection with Planck. This is a Herschel image, so Herschel spire, for those who know, so 250, 350, and 500 microns in fast color. It's the former thesis of David Guéry and Clément Martinage. The right contour is the Planck detection, and the yellow contour is the density of Herschel sources, of red Herschel sources, namely at high redshift. We didn't put all the Herschel sources because some galaxies are foreground. So here there is a nice coincidence. I mean, it's normal, it's the same wavelength. And when you zoom into this guy, this is what Spitzer gives you. So you see that you need all this information in order to be confident that these guys might be clusters at high redshift. So far we don't know that these guys are clusters. We have just indications that this guy might be clusters or protoclusters. We have no indication of redshift, no indication of mass, everything. Except that the colors already give us some information. So based only on color, and I'm switching to this section where I'm trying to analyze what photometry gives us. Just based on colors, we are able to derive some information. Like, I was going to say photometric redshift. It's not photometric redshift because only with 2 or 3 bands, it's not photometric redshift. But you can guess roughly what the redshift is. So we did that with Herschel. This is the redshift here. And depending on the assumption you make on the dust mass, because there is degeneracy, you see that we hit the redshift 2 zone because in the literature, most of the galaxies have a temperature of 35 Kelvin. So it was a first good indication that all our sources were redshift 2, which is normal given the selection because we're selecting in colors. When you do that with Spitzer, the color of Spitzer, so namely IRAC 3.6 and 4.5 micron, for those who know how Spitzer works, you can have a clear idea of what's going on up to redshift 1.3. Then after, and 1.5, after, the Spitzer color does not allow you to give accurate redshift. But we got an ID which is very inaccurate. You have the error bar here. So it's not photometric redshift, but we have indications that the Spitzer counterpart might be at certain redshift, 1.5 or above. So we were fairly happy with that. But what really characterizes our sample is the star formation rate. The star formation rate of the Planck structure peaks at 7,000 solar masses per year. It's huge, it's huge. When you do that, so this is the whole bunch of sources. There is not only one guy that contributes to this incredible level. When you do that with Spitzer, because usually you have 10 Spitzer sources per Herschel source, it goes down to like 1,000 solar masses per year, which is already incredibly high. But we start to resolve where star formation is. So probably high redshift and very strongly forming stars. The other thing we can derive is the overdensity. Even if I already mentioned, simulation sometimes tells you that protoclusters are not very overdense. They are hugely placed, I mean, highly wide in the sky. I'm showing you 3 programs of Herschel, or programs, a Planck follow-up, Herschel follow-up of Planck sources. It's roughly the same size. Herschel lensing survey by Eiichi Egami. So he was looking at lower redshift clusters, looking for background lensed source. One is here. But you see that at low redshift, there is no submillimeter emission of galaxy clusters. While here, it's just popping out. And here is one of the deepest survey, GOODS, by David Elbaz et al., where you see it's not exactly the same wavelength, but you see that you have a lot of galaxies, but there is no big clustering and structure like this. the size is approximately the same. So by visual inspection, but also with statistical tools we use, we demonstrate that our fields, our Herschel fields on Planck sources are by far overdense and significantly overdense than any other Herschel survey. So it's not a surprise. I mean, Planck saw a big chunk of sources that we confirmed with Herschel. So it's no surprise, but the significance is very high. Same is true with Spitzer, so at stellar light wavelengths in the near infrared. Here it's Clément Martinach's work. You have this in color, background color, the Spitzer overdensity significance. So the greener, the more dense it is. And the black and white source show you the location of the Spire Herschel source. So you see that there is some correlation between where Spire is, so far infrared, submillimeter, and the density of near infrared galaxies, red galaxies. So we are happy. It doesn't demonstrate anything, but given we have 80 fields, not all the fields are like this, but most of them. So we think we are seeing something very special, concentration of galaxy and amazing star formation rate. And the density with Spitzer are also very high. This is the density of galaxies per arc minute square. And this is the number of fields. If you take a random field with Spitzer, you get the black distribution of density of galaxies. Basically, when you don't have any correlation, it's black. It's done on large surveys. When you observe Carla sources, so this is AGN at high redshift where there is clusters around. It's a very nice program, by the way. You see that their density of galaxies is much higher than the random field. So it tells you that protoclusters around radio galaxies are significantly overdense. And when we do the same with our program, Spitzer, well, even more dense, which raises a few questions. It might be a good news. More dense means maybe more mass, more whatever. But it might be also bad news. It might be that you have two structures that are, on the line of sight of your detection. So you might be seeing two, or maybe a wall or cosmic structure, which is great, but it will be complicated to sort out. So it's either good news and bad news, and we don't know yet. So we will stick on the good news, right? We go also at the shorter wavelength in J and K. So this is the thesis of Benjamin Clarenc, who passed his PhD thesis last Tuesday. So very happy about that. So we have 13 fields. So this is K image from WIRCAM CFHT. The yellow is the Herschel footprint, and the red is Spitzer. You might wonder why the hell are we on the top left? It's because you have quadrants, and we didn't want to put our target right in the middle where we have less weight. But that's just a comment. So if you zoom in, you see that you have the Spitzer field, K image, and you have an overdensity of also near-infrared galaxies, which is highlighted here. Benjamin did a density map. You have density of galaxies per square arc minute. This is the red stuff. And you see that the overdensity of red near-infrared galaxies, so supposedly at higher redshift, coincides with Spire, which is the yellow, and IRAC, which is the dash. So again, we have some coincidence there. But you also see that you have overdensity of galaxies near infrared with no Spire source, and you have also Spire source, so far infrared, with no overdensity. So you have all the combinations basically. So is it significant? Is it a problem? So we don't know, but we think it's not a big problem, because if you look back at the Muldrow simulation, you have 40 arc minutes here. Here it's a few arc minutes, but the whole field is like 20 by 20. You might be seeing a central part. It's just an hypothesis. It's by no way confirmed. You might be seeing here, for instance, concentration of what will become the core of the cluster, and the edge where you have less concentration but more star formation. Could be possible. You have all the combination. We don't know yet, but at least the spatial scales are compatible with this. So it might be that, but we don't know. And finally, to finish on the imaging view, we got some ALMA data. ALMA is just amazing, as you know. And it helped answering us a lot of questions. So you have the Herschel image here, a lot of bright infrared sources, sublimeter sources. When you do a K image of this region, you have this, and these are the Spire image, a lot of galaxy everywhere, scuba, everything. But what's important is the following. When we do an ALMA focused survey on these guys, and here, this is the next image, if it works, yeah. You have 8 pointings. This is the Spitzer image, and the purple points are the ALMA detections. And all of these corresponds to one Herschel source. So the takeaway message from this plot is the following. There is still this question, if you have a Herschel bright source, is it 1 galaxy, 10 galaxies, 2, whatever? ALMA, on this case, demonstrates us that in many cases, it's just 1 galaxy that produces the whole Herschel flux. In some case 2, and in some case 3, I don't know. I guess that's maybe 2, 2.5. And so it's not 10. That's a very good piece of information. So the huge star formation rate that we're observing are likely due, so biased due to confusion, but also they are likely due only to 1, 2, or 3 galaxies. So again, it's not very quantitative. We just have a few examples, but as you know, it's complex to get there.
Those are continuum detections?
Yes. Yes, continuum detections, yeah. And on the side of the band, we start to have a line, so we have an idea of the redshift. It's in the Rüdiger Kneissel paper, and we can talk. Yeah, it's continuum, we started with that. We asked for a redshift line survey, but they say, hey, no. It was not ready, so. I talk about millimetric redshift now, actually, it's very exciting. So, imaging is nice, but you are very limited. Spectroscopy is the best, but it's complicated to get. So we got a few success, nevertheless. Flores Cachot, a few years ago, in our first, actually I can show you the first detection we had. This is the Planck image. So 845, 545, 353, and guess 217 gigahertz. So 1 degree by 1 degree. This is how our protocluster looked like in Planck. Clean map, processed, everything. And when you do a zoom, 6 by 6 arc minutes on the central part, this is what Herschel sees. So we were really exciting back in the days, because 200 micron and 500 micron looks like these galaxies are much brighter than this one. So it looks like the spectrum is rising. So we were really exciting to follow them up. And Flores Cachot and all, mainly the Toulouse team, but not only, followed these 5 Herschel sources, well, 4 here. And we got redshift, 1.6 and 2. So we were happy and disappointing. Happy because it confirmed it's a high redshift source, highly star forming. Unhappy because we have 2 structures, right? So it happens. It might happen. We just have no idea how frequent this case will happen. But here we have a mix of 2 structures, at least two redshifts. Now going to the millimeter range. IRAM really saved us the day. We follow up at 30-meter EMIR with 4 hours per line integration, 6 candidates, and we got a few confirmations of Herschel sources. So this guy, so this is the Herschel image of the candidate, and so we point here. Actually, it's Clément Martinhache and Benjamin Clarinck who made most of the work. And we got nice CO detection at 2.55 on these guys, and above 2.6 on the other guy. This might be one of the highest redshift clusters detected on this category. So we are really excited. In some case, we have 2 Herschel sources at the same redshift. So we proved that we have a structure. 2 pointings, I know, is not big compared to optical surveys or things like that, but it's a good start. So we have here the redshift distribution, very coarse. Benjamin Clarinck did that in his thesis. So this is a redshift, and this is the significance of the lines we have, CO lines. And you see we have a peak, we have a few sources at redshift 2.4 and above. We have a few guys at lower redshift, but most of them are above redshift 2. So it's very, very exciting. And proposal will be continuing as you can guess. And For hours integration is great to detect CO lines. It's still kind of difficult to make a detailed study of the dynamics with this kind of signal-to-noise ratio. So it's still limited. So we need a slightly better signal-to-noise ratio to see the enlargement of the lines, etc. And from that, we derived the star formation rate density. So Clément is doing that. Redshift, stellar formation rate density, field galaxies, previous cluster from the literature, and it's still preliminary because we need to check stuff, but looks like it will be on this kind of range, so compatible with previous selections, which also raises some question. And very recently, we received NOEMA data, our first success in NOEMA after many tries, and this is a CO detection of the main source, but also seen by Emir previously, but we start to see few guys around. So this is two separate pointings of the same structure, the same redshift. So the CO line seems to be there, and in continuum, if you average out, you have got more signal to noise. But it looks like it's a real structure at the same redshift, although it needs to be confirmed. So take-away message is that it's really exciting, at least to me and a few of us. And we have a lot to do to really understand what these guys are. And at the end of the day, what was the full selection, and what does it learn? What do we learn? Because if you look at this plot, we don't learn much. I mean, we just confirm, but there is nothing specifically new. So we have to really sort this out. And I'm about to finish. Just a few slides. But the prospects, of course, the prospects to continue these kind of programs, but we have major missions coming in. Euclid and JWST, to speak for a few. So Euclid, so this laboratory is heavily involved. Euclid will be the next big cosmology mission from the European Space Agency program. And if we take our galaxies, so this is the wavelength and the flux of these galaxies. If we take the detection of some of the clusters I showed you previously, I guess it's from the Wang, yeah, it's not ours, because at that time we didn't have redshift. It's made by a student. If you take the Wang cluster at 2.5 and you average out their flux densities and you make some models, you see that these galaxies are very bright for Euclid. The Euclid-wide limit is around here, so you will see galaxy above, and Euclid deep, you will see galaxies above. That means that the Wang cluster, or the clusters we have, will be seen all over the place by Euclid. Euclid will be full of these clusters. The problem is that currently we don't know how to detect them based on the Euclid spectral coverage. I mean, you could check in Planck and stuff, but it would be complicated. So the challenge for the teams now is to, from the Euclid and maybe LSST optical bands, how to extrapolate and see that these guys are redshift 2-ish clusters. Also, even if photometric redshift in Euclid will work well. So Euclid, major prospects, of course, for also lower redshift galaxy clusters, for cosmology and everything. I'm just focusing here on high redshift protoclusters. And JWST will be fantastic as well because of its wavelength range, mid-infrared and near-infrared. So I'm showing you galaxy spectra here, taken from a famous review. And I redshifted the scale in Photoshop to scale it to redshift 2. I did it quickly, but I didn't update it. And you get so this is basically observed now. This is a range of NIRCam and NIRSPEC and MIRI. And so if you follow these guys, both in photometry and even more in spectroscopy, you can get insights of gas processes, maybe star formation, but well, we won't go to 20 micron because it's too time consuming with MIRI. But we will have a clear view on the physical processes there. And we put already a proposal that was turned down. It was an ERS proposal, but I guess it happened to many of us in the room maybe, or some of you were successful, and congratulations, but I was not in the case. So I called it a proposal, but we will put that in GO1, where we will focus on NIRCam, MIRIM, and so NIRIS and NIRSPEC to get the lines and the physics of those galaxies in the clusters to try to answer this major question: what is the fate of the gas? What is the star formation of individual galaxies, not big chunks? And can we understand better this? These were our three targets. And what's going on? Is this picture still viable or not? I will conclude with this picture in summarizing the fact that protocluster is a very active field, and with Planck and Herschel and Spitzer, etc., we think we have a major sample of protoclusters at high redshift, which are dominated by high star formation rates. We are not completely sure. As you have seen, we have just 6 or 7 redshifts so far, but we think it can shed a new light on how these clusters form and how the baryon gas accretes and forms stars in this extreme structure. Planck is fantastic at detecting extreme structures. And we hope we will continue with success with this program. So it requires a lot of observation and models, but well, that's the game to play. And also I hope to convince you that Euclid and JWST, ALMA of course, and the other facilities as well, will also make a breakthrough in terms of statistics on one side and detailed physics on the other side, if we get successful, which is another story, but I guess all in the room we are in the same place. So that was the scientific conclusion, and I wanted to make a more personal conclusion, because I'm talking here about science and exciting space physics and stuff, but it reminds me, because we hosted some refugees in my university a few weeks ago, and I happened to organize star parties for them and jazz concerts and stuff. And so it occurred to me, even if it's obvious, that the science, as we talk here, is not completely disconnected from society. So I encourage all of you. I'm sure, I know this institute is very in advance for that, but to go meet the society, so the public in general, because in the context of our postmodern societies and etc., it's important that science is widely shared, but not as a dogmatic way, just as a procedure, way to think, and then you let people think what they want. But I guess it's very important. And this experience, you see, I'm showing the CMB to Afghanese refugees. I didn't thought any time it could happen in my life to talk about CMB to Afghanese refugees, but it did happen. It was a great experience, and you see that basically curiosity is a major driver for human behavior. So as long as you keep the curiosity, especially to the youngest, I guess we win for a better society. So that was my personal conclusion. Thanks for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Hervé. I'm sure there are lots of questions. Gary, of course.
Gary is the first.
I'll start with a personal note. My father was an Afghani refugee in France, but he was actually born in Uzbekistan. He had to escape the Soviet Union, but he was officially from Afghanistan. So yes, it's important what you're talking about. So anyway, thank you for this very multi-wavelength view of protoclusters. So I had two questions. One is, 10 years ago, Olga Kuchati and David Elbaz argued that, contrary to low redshift, where in clusters of galaxies there's a segregation of star formation in the sense that in the dense regions of clusters, galaxies are quenched, and only in the outskirts you see the star-forming galaxies, that beyond redshift 1 it's the opposite. So I was wondering whether there's more information about that today, and if so, where are what causes the quiescent galaxies not being in the dense regions? And the second question was that you mentioned about Euclid. So Euclid will see the protoclusters, but what will be the richness of these protoclusters? Will we detect them as rich clusters, or because at redshift 2, it's 2.5, exactly. That's difficult. Exactly. Or will there just be 5 galaxies, and then we'll just have to work from there?
Yeah, thanks for these two very important questions. You're right that about star formation segregation in an environment, it's at least to me it's an open question, because as you say, there are many works that tend to see that star formation increases at higher redshift in denser environments. But as you know, these observations are very difficult. Most of them are based on Cosmos or this kind of surveys which have tens of wavebands and stuff. Here we have almost nothing. We have 4 bands or 5 bands. Well, I'm talking about the Planck stuff and Herschel stuff. So I cannot answer this question today, but that's part of what we want to do. Taking from your question, it arises that also a major question in today's astrophysics is the quenching. I took that from the recent paper in Nature or whatever. Putting a perspective, what causes star formation and what causes its stop, so basically quenching. And in these 2 or 3 page article, basically it's like a review. They put all the physical phenomena. And what could happen in very dense environment clusters, you see that you have AGN feedback in most of the processes. That's the easy answer, saying, well, AGN feedback could be a way to quench and stop star formation, but I have personally no clue yet, because our data does not allow to do that. But you're right, it's a pregnant question. You know, if I summarize the big question in today's astrophysics and cosmology, dark matter, dark energy, and quenching, basically, how does it work? And fate of the gas, which is related. That will be the 3 main questions. About Euclid, I completely agree with you. That's why I'm stating that Euclid data will be full of these guys, and we have no idea how to detect them. Because richness, we do not expect them to be very rich. If you look back at the simulations, I mean, they are very, very widely spread, as we have seen here. I mean, it's arc minutes, and the over density is very low. So that's a challenge. So people are currently working very hard on classical below 2 redshift clusters for cosmology mainly. And there is a group, basically, Simona, Mei, Dadi, me, and others, who try to see how Euclid data will be an opportunity to detect those guys. But richness won't be enough. Color won't be enough, because we expect to have a spread in colors between star forming and passive galaxy already at those redshifts. So that's not enough. Photo-Z, we won't have them for all galaxies at this accuracy. So that's an open question. We have what, 3 years to finish developing and answer it. So open question. Thanks for these two sticky points.
Hi, so a very interesting talk. I had a question regarding, so you mentioned that these protoclusters were sites of significant star formation, right?
Yeah.
And especially towards high redshift, they represent a significant fraction of the cosmic star formation.
Yeah.
And I was just curious as to what is the metallicity in these environments? Do you have any idea, any types of measurements of metallicity?
So I don't, but back from my first part of career, where I was studying infrared galaxies at those redshifts, like redshift 2 or more, basically the metallicity was half. So the ULERs, ultra-luminous infrared galaxies, basically they already formed half of the stars already, so they are very enriched. Mm-hmm. So just talking about field ULERs, so it's not this case, but I know some works have been done, but I have no idea about the results, so I can't answer you. But my guess would be, it can be wrong, but my guess would be that these are already fairly enriched places. Because even at redshift 6, I mean, we see huge star formation rate with already a lot of metals. So at redshift 2, with all the, in the nodes or in dense part of the cosmic web, I would guess and I would bet that this is a fairly enriched medium. But that's just a guess.
Other questions? I have 2 myself. Do you have an idea of the specific star formation rates?
We try, we try. It's so far we have huge error bars, because remember we have redshift for only 6 of the guys, so we try to do that. Galaxies are fairly confused, so it's difficult. So it's a work in progress. That's the first thing I asked the students to do, but we got error bars as big as the plot, so far it's not very constraining, but that's the next step, definitely.
And the second one is, can you use those simulations to compute the probability of occurrence of the superposition of several structures on the line?
Yeah, that's a project we have since a few years, but we never had time to do it. I was in connection with the Lutz people, you know, Pierre Stefano, Cora Saniti, and all these guys. We have this Deus simulation of all sky, so we were really excited to be able to compare the all sky simulation with the Planck data we have in terms of statistics and stuff. But we never had time to put this project into reality. There was a recent paper that addressed this question, but it deals only with, if I remember correctly, with optical or near-infrared data. So where the confusion is already very weak, so it cannot be applied. And they have a color way to remove the foregrounds, and they have a clean selection at the end. But it does not apply to our case because we are heavily confused, and so we could have many overlapping structure. And I must say that the Negrello prediction paper, which I'm a co-author of, even if I was not happy with the conclusions, in their simulation they predict that most of the Planck structure would be at least two overlapping structure based on on correlation function and stuff like that. So they put the cursor very high on overlapping structure. We hope it's less. We'll see in the coming years how it goes. If the contamination, if the fact that you have few structures is very high, we could switch to a cosmic web structure directly, and it could be nice to see directly star formation in the cosmic web. It's not what we expected at first, but we'll see what the data tell us.
Hakim?
Oh là, je sens des nasty questions.
You were mentioning the different selection techniques of these protoclusters, like from X-ray to the infrared, and it seems like the main difference between these selection techniques is the age of these protoclusters. If you're selecting by star formation, you're looking at young protoclusters. X-ray, you have relaxed. So I was wondering if you are seeing any evolution in the surface density of this protocluster depending on the selection and as a function of redshift.
That's a good question we are trying to address. That's a very good idea, and that's what we put in the proposals. But I'm unable to answer this question now. The idea, indeed, is to see the evolutionary sequence, because that's what we want, of the gas, but also the more dense part, which is the galaxies and star formation sites. But at least with the Planck program we have, we are unable already to put this kind of constraint. But that's the idea, to do that eventually. Yeah.
Okay, I guess we have to invite you in the coming years to follow up on all those subjects.
Yeah. Alain, tu avais une question?
Alain?
So you point out that getting redshift is quite essential to exploit this unique and huge amount of data. So could you summarize what is your strategy? How do you see the strategy to get redshift for that?
Yeah.
It's clear that EMIR with 4 hour or 8 hour per source would be quite
Yeah.
Even NOEMA, I think, is too much. So
It's better, yeah.
could you expect something before Euclid, and what do you expect really for Euclid?
Yeah, so our strategy is the following. First, we will focus on the few candidates we have where we have redshift to publish and to make them aware to the distinguished members of the time allocation committees of telescopes. And then we are planning on putting a large program on IRAM in the coming, maybe next printemps, comment on dit ça, spring, next spring or maybe next fall, we'll see. With the idea of using EMIR and NOEMA, because we still have a few bright Herschel sources to follow up with EMIR. So even if it's limited, I mean, it's 4 hours per line is complicated. We want to make a flux limited sample Herschel sources of those protoclusters. It won't be that long. Then,
What flux do you mean?
60-ish millijansky at 60 at 350 micron Herschel. I think we can talk. Of course, you'll be associated, so we can talk in detail. The idea is not completely formalized. Then on the same program, put NOEMA targets. So when there is a line detected in EMIR, put in NOEMA because it's clearly a boost in the analysis because you got the lines, you got the better. So I didn't put the spectra, but you got of course you can do spectral analysis, width and everything. and you see the structure of the source. So our main strategy will be Noema, Emir, Alma as well, but Alma we try since a few times.
What is a fraction of sources with 60? You talk which wavelengths here? You're 60.
Let me back up. So far with Emir, we have like a 70% success rate in detecting lines because we used bright Herschel sources. If you go to 60 millijansky at 350 microns in Herschel, maybe the rate will slightly decrease, but still we hope it will be more than half. And then go to Noema to get these guys. There is Alma. And then, in parallel, there is this JWST program we want to put in, and within Euclid, ways to detect. So it's beyond the flow of Planck sources, because with Euclid you'll have a more larger sample. So in a nutshell, and not to annoy everyone, that's the kind of strategy we want to put. Now we have a clear view on this. And I must say that most of the work is done by PhD students. So PhD students are really the major part of this work.
No other questions, so thank you, Hervé.
Merci de m'avoir invité. Thanks.